The old warning had been passed down for so long that most of the younger Velhari did not take it seriously anymore. It was something the elders said around dim hearths when the night cycles were long, and the younger ones were restless. Never fly close to the third planet of the yellow star. That was the warning, 7 words. Simple and old and worn smooth by the mouths of 1,000 generations. Elder Savin still believed every one of them. She was not a fearful creature by nature. In her long life, she had navigated 3 political collapses, 2 border wars, and 1 plague that had swept through the outer colonies and taken almost a quarter of the Velhari population before the healers found a way to stop it. She had survived all of it by being careful, by being patient, and by listening to things that other people dismissed as old stories. She sat now in the curved observation chamber of the council ship, her 4 silver-tipped fingers pressed flat against her knees, staring at the star map that rotated slowly in the air before her. The map was detailed and accurate. She had updated it herself over many years. And there, near the edge of one quiet arm of the galaxy, was the yellow star. Small, warm, unremarkable in almost every way, except for the third planet. Savin had sent a drone to that system 12 cycles ago. A quiet drone built to observe and record and return without being detected. She had not told the full council she was doing it. She had filed the mission under a standard survey code and waited. The drone had come back 3 cycles ago, and what it had brought with it had kept Savin awake for many nights since. She pressed a small button on the arm of her chair, and the drone footage began to play on the wall of the chamber. The image was taken from a great distance at first, showing the planet as a blue and white sphere turning slowly in the dark. It was beautiful in a simple way, mostly water with large brown and green land masses running through it like broken plates pressed together by some ancient force underground. Then the drone had moved closer. The land masses were covered with lines, straight lines, curved lines, grids and rings, and long, thin threads that stretched from one cluster of lights to another. The lights were brightest at night when the planet's dark side turned toward the drone's camera. The whole surface glowed from the inside, like an ember that had not yet gone cold. They had cities, many of them, big ones. And then the drone footage showed something that had stopped Savin's breath the first time she saw it. Metal objects shaped roughly like a column punched through the planet's atmosphere from below. It climbed on a bright tail of fire and chemical smoke. It climbed for a long time. It kept climbing after most objects would have fallen back, and then it reached the vacuum of space and kept going, and it did not stop until it reached the small gray moon that orbited the blue planet. The metal object set itself down on the surface of the moon. 4 legs extended from its base and caught the gray dust. A door opened. 2 small figures in white protective suits climbed out and walked on the moon's surface. They moved slowly in the low gravity, a careful but not afraid. One of them bent down and pushed a thin pole into the gray dust. A piece of fabric unfurled from the top of the pole, colored in stripes of red, white, and blue. They had planted a flag. They had come all the way to their moon and planted a flag in the dust. Then they got back inside the metal object and flew home. Savin had watched that footage 9 times. Each time she tried to find the Rational explanation, the boring one. The one that would let her stop losing sleep each time she failed, because the rational explanation for climbing to your own moon and planting a flag in the dust was not really about the moon at all. It was about proving something to yourselves, to whoever might be watching. We were here, we came all this way, we did it. She called the council to session that evening. The 7 high elders filed into the ring-shaped chamber and took their curved seats. Their crests were dim with age. Several of them moved slowly. Elder Dorak, the oldest of the group, settled into his chair with a long exhale and looked at Savin with the mild impatience of someone who had sat through many emergency sessions that turned out not to be emergencies. Savin played the drone footage without speaking. When it ended, nobody said anything for a while. Then Dorak waved one tendril in a dismissive arc. They use chemical combustion, he said. They have not achieved fold space travel. They cannot reach us. This is not a threat. The old texts do not speak about their technology, Savin said quietly. She reached into the inner pocket of her robe and produced an archive chip. It was very old, and the casing had gone pale and slightly soft at the edges from age. She pressed it into the reader bill, into the chamber wall, and let the words appear in old Velhari script. The writing was formal and careful, the way people wrote when they knew what they were putting down would matter later. They do not stop, the text read, not for pain, not for loss, not for the cold between stars. They buried their dead and kept moving. They broke their own bodies and rebuilt those bodies with metal and wire and kept moving. They took poison and found ways to turn it into medicine. They took disaster and made it into a lesson. They took death and used it as a reason to go further. Do not let them find you, because once they have a reason to reach you, nothing in the known universe has ever made them stop. The chamber was very quiet after that, and Dorak's crest had gone a shade paler. That text, he said slowly, was written by the Kareth. Yes, Savin said, the Kareth, who were the most advanced civilization in this quadrant 11,000 years ago. Yes, the Kareth who no longer exist. Yes, Savin said again. And she let the silence sit there and do its work. The other council members shifted in their seats. One of the younger elders, a slim figure named Ron, leaned forward with her crest brightening in the way it did when she was processing something difficult. But the Kareth were not destroyed by these beings, she said carefully. They were destroyed by the Voreth. That is correct, Savin said. But the Kareth were watching the humans. In the years before the end, they were watching and writing things down, but then what they wrote down was not a warning about weapons or warships. It was a warning about something they did not have a word for, something they had never seen in any other species before. What was it? Ron asked. Savin looked at the old text still glowing on the wall. Stubbornness, she said, but bigger than stubbornness, a kind of will that does not know how to recognize an ending. Most species, when they face something large enough, accept that it cannot be overcome, and they change course. They adapt. They find a different path. That is the sensible thing to do. That is what every civilization in our records has done. She paused. These beings look at the thing that cannot be overcome and they walk toward it. Nobody spoke. Outside the observation windows of the council chamber, stars burned in there. Quiet millions, and in somewhere out there close by in galactic terms, a species that had only just learned to reach its own moon was already looking further, already planning the next flag to plant in someone else's dust. Savin looked at the council and said, very calmly, "We need to make a decision before they make it for us." And for the first time in a very long while, Elder Doric did not argue. The object had been drifting for a very long time before anyone found it. Deep Space Monitoring Station Farpet 9 had flagged it as an anomaly 11 days before the exploration vessel Ardent Hope arrived to investigate. The station's report was short and dry in the way all automated reports were. Metallic object non-terrestrial. Composition drifting at the outer edge of the asteroid belt, no power. Signature no active transmissions. In dimensions consistent with a small single-occupant vessel. Lieutenant Dan Calloway read the report 3 times during the 2-day transit to the location. He was not sure what he was hoping to find. In 14 years of deep space work, he had learned to expect the boring explanation first: unusual mineral deposits, old human equipment that had drifted further than expected, sensor ghosts from dense asteroid clusters. The universe was good at looking mysterious and then turning out to be perfectly ordinary. But the composition readings in the report were not ordinary. The metal alloys were nothing in the human database, and the shape of the object, when the long-range cameras resolved it clearly on the 2nd day of travel, was nothing any human hand had built. So Commander Laura Hale called the crew of 6 together in the briefing room and went over the approach plan carefully. She was a precise woman who did not waste words or movements. She had short dark hair and a habit of tapping one finger against the table when she was thinking hard, and she tapped it steadily through the whole briefing. "We treat this like any recovery operation," she said. 2-person teams, full suits, no rushing. Nobody touches anything without calling it in first. We photograph before we move anything. We move nothing we do not absolutely have to move. She looked around the table. Any questions? Nobody had any. The spacewalk took 40 minutes to set up, and about 10 minutes to wish they had brought more camera equipment, and the object was small, roughly 4 m long and 2 m wide, and shaped like a rounded wedge, like a seed pod that had been gently squeezed on 2 sides. Its hull was the color of old iron, pitted and scored by years of micrometeorite impacts. One end had a dark panel that might once have been a viewport. The other end had a cluster of nozzles that might once have been thrusters. Dan floated around the outside of it twice, photographing everything before he found the hatch. It was on the underside, and it was already open, not broken open. The hinges were intact and the seal ring was undamaged. Someone had opened it from the inside and not closed it again when they left, or when they were taken, or when they stopped being able to. He called it into Commander Hale, who came over and floated beside him for a moment, and both of them looking at the open hatch in the same silence. "Going in," she said. The inside of the vessel was small and dark. Dan's helmet lamp swept across padded surfaces that had gone stiff with cold over the years, a set of controls that meant nothing to him, and a single seat shaped for a body that was not human. wider at the base, narrower at the top, with 2 shallow grooves where something, with more than 2 arms might have, rested them. Then his lamp hit the far wall and he stopped moving. The wall was covered in writing, not printed, not made by any machine, carved slowly and carefully into the metal with something sharp, stroke by stroke, the way a person carves when they have a great deal of time and something very important to say, and no other way to say it. "Commander Hale," Dan said, and his voice came out quieter than he meant it to. "You need to see this." She floated in through the hatch and her lamp joined his on the wall. For a long time neither of them said anything at all. The symbols were dense and precise, covering almost every centimeter of available surface. Whoever had made them had been thorough. Whoever had made them had wanted very badly to be understood. "Photograph every centimeter," Laura said at last. "Every single centimeter." Back aboard the Arden Hope, the ship's translation AI worked for 4 and 1/2 hours. It was not built for truly alien languages. No human system was, not yet. But the mathematical structures embedded in the symbol patterns gave it enough of a handhold. The AI flagged its confidence level as moderate, at which in AI terms meant somewhere between educated guess and genuine understanding. Dr. Priya Nair, the mission's xenolinguist, spent another 2 hours going over the AI's work by hand. She was young for her role, 31, with the kind of focused quiet that people sometimes mistook for shyness until they saw her work. She did not come to dinner. She did not answer the 2 messages Dan sent, checking on her. When she finally called everyone to the briefing room, it was late into the ship's night cycle and there were shadows under her eyes. She did not sit down. She stood at the head of the table with a tablet in her hands and looked at the 5 people watching her. "Some of it is too degraded to recover," she said. "The metal was scored in places and some symbols are incomplete, but the core of the message is consistent throughout. I am going to read you what I have, and I want you to let me finish before anyone says anything." She looked down at the tablet. "We thought we were alone near the yellow star system. We were wrong. The beings on the 3rd planet detected our survey vessel before we detected them. They sent a transmission. We did not respond. Our protocol was observation only. They sent another transmission and another. On the 15th attempt, they did not send a transmission. They sent a vessel instead. Not a weapon, a vessel with a living crew. They flew out from their planet into the dark to find us, and they were not afraid." She paused. Nobody at the table made a sound. "We observed them for 1 full rotation of their planet around their star before they found a way to make the translation work. They were patient. They did not push. They sent mathematics first, then images, then simple sounds. When one of our crew members became ill from a bacterial infection in our food supplies, they noticed the change in our activity patterns, and they sent medicine across in a sealed container attached to a small unmanned vehicle. We did not ask for it. They simply sent it." Dan looked at the table's surface. He was not sure why he was looking at the table. He did not want to look at anyone else's face right now. "When our provisions ran low, they sent food again without being asked. When one of our crew died, equipment failure, not their doing, they watched our Morning ceremony on their long-range cameras, and then they sent a message. The message took 3 days to translate. It said, "We are sorry for your loss. We know you are far from home. You are not alone." Priya stopped reading. She set the tablet down on the table very carefully. Cole Barker, the youngest crew member, was looking at the ceiling. His jaw was tight. Commander Hale spoke first. "Who wrote this? What species?" "We do not know yet," said, "but based on the age of the metal, degradation, and the decay patterns in the pod's internal components, the best estimate is that this was written approximately 3,000 years ago." 3,000 years. Dan did the math without wanting to. 3,000 years ago humanity had been building early empires on one small planet. 3,000 years ago someone else had been out here in the dark watching the lights on Earth's surface and had decided to leave a letter at the edge of the solar system. A letter meant for whoever came looking. But they left it here on purpose, Dan said. It was not a question. Yes, Priya said, the drift calculations place its original position at a very specific point. It was not drifting when it was left. It was parked at the edge of our system waiting. The briefing room was quiet for a long moment. Then Dan Calloway looked up from the table, looked at Commander Hale, and said the thing that everyone in the room was already thinking. "We have to answer it." Laura Hale looked back at him for a moment, then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had already decided something and was just waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. "Yes," she said. "We do." The Galactic Accord's public archive was one of the oldest things in the known galaxy. It had existed in one form or another for longer than most current civilizations had been keeping records. It stored everything: trade logs, military reports, scientific findings, personal journals, second-hand accounts, third-hand rumors, and the kind of careful observations that only very patient minds produced. Any registered species could access it. The Velhari had been registered members for over 2,000 years and had contributed a considerable portion of the archives. Content themselves. Savan had used the archive many times in her long career. She had never before searched it for records about the beings of the third planet around the yellow star. She did that now. She sat alone in the archive access alcove of the council ship, the lights turned low, a warm drink going cold at her elbow. Savan she read for 6 hours without stopping. The humans did not appear often. They had not yet made any formal contact with the wider galactic community, and so there was no official record of them as a registered species. But they appeared in the margins of other records, in footnotes, in the background of other people's stories. And those appearances, read one after another, built a picture that was not what Savan had expected. The first record she found was a Draenei merchant log from 43 years ago. Merchant, a trader named Asiv, who ran a small cargo route through the outer systems, had experienced a catastrophic engine failure while passing through the outer reaches of human-controlled space. The region was uncharted at the time, and the nearest registered rescue service was over a week away. Asiv had sent out a distress beacon and begun calculating how long his life support would last. Before he finished the calculation, a human ship appeared. It had been in the area running a standard patrol. The Humans called it a Coast Guard vessel, a concept that the Vilhari archive translator noted was derived from their practice of protecting travel routes along their planet's water coastlines. Extended now to space, the crew of the vessel had detected the beacon and come immediately. Asif noted in his log that they arrived faster than he thought possible given the distances involved, which suggested they had pushed their engines harder than was strictly safe to do so. They pulled his crew aboard, they fed everyone. They spent 3 days making repairs to his cargo ship using parts from their own supply stores, and they would not accept payment. When Asif insisted, the human captain, a broad-shouldered man named Gary Weston, had waved the offer away and said, according to the translation, something along the lines of "you needed help and we had it, that's all this is." Asif's log ended that entry with a single line that Savan read twice. "I did not know what to do with this. Nothing in my experience had prepared me for it." The second record was a Thune military report from 61 years ago. The Thune were not a warm species. They were large, heavily built, and their civilization had been built on a long history of territorial conflict. Their military reports were written in a clipped and aggressive style that the archive translated faithfully. The report described an encounter with what the author called, with evident irritation, may a primitive human warship of unusual behavior. A Thune patrol vessel had drifted into a disputed boundary region. The Thune claimed it was an error of navigation, though the archive's margin notes from a Drani observer suggested this was unlikely. A human ship had intercepted them. The human captain had opened a communication channel immediately. The Thune commander had expected a confrontation. He had prepared a formal territorial challenge in response. What he received instead was a question. The human captain asked if everyone aboard the Thune vessel was all right. The Thune commander, apparently thrown completely off his prepared response by this question, had defaulted to aggression and issued a threat. The human ship had not fired, it had not retreated, and it had held its position. And the human captain had come back on the channel a moment later and said, and this was the part Savan read 3 times, "I heard you, I just don't think you mean it. So I'm going to stay here until we find a better way to talk about this." The standoff had lasted 4 hours. It ended without violence. The Thune vessel withdrew. The human ship did not pursue. The Thune report's author wrote at the end, the behavior of the human vessel was outside all standard engagement models and could not be predicted or countered by existing doctrine. Further study recommended. Savan set down her drink. She had not touched it in 2 hours, and it was fully cold now. She did not notice. She moved deeper into the archive, past the recent records, past the century-old logs, and down into the older material where the records were sparse and the translations grew uncertain. She was looking for the Karath documents. She had known about their existence for years. She had never felt the need to read the primary sources before she read them now. The Karath civilization had been extraordinary. They had achieved fold space travel 4,000 years before the Velhari did. They had mapped more of the galaxy than any species before or since. Their science had been centuries ahead of everyone around them, and their Philosophy had been gentle and careful, and deeply considered. They had been the estimation of every species that recorded contact with them genuinely good, and they had watched the humans, not up close, not in the way Savin's drone had watched them, but the Kareth had observed from extreme distances using instruments so sensitive they could read the atmospheric composition of a planet from several light years away. They had tracked the humans across centuries, watching from their quiet vantage as a species that could barely light a fire learned to build great walls, then great ships, then great cities that glowed at night. One Kareth scientist named Faroth had written a detailed analysis of human behavioral patterns that the archive had preserved almost completely. Savin read it slowly, taking care with the archaic translation. Faroth wrote, "Every other species in our survey data trends in one of two directions as its civilization develops. It either moves toward cooperation at the expense of competitive drive, or it moves toward dominance at the expense of empathy. These two tendencies appear to be in natural tension, and one always eventually wins out. The species on the third planet of the yellow star does not follow this pattern. Both tendencies operate in them simultaneously at full strength, and neither one cancels the other. They fight each other, and then they build hospitals for the wounded on both sides. They compete fiercely, and then they share the results of that competition. They are terrified of death, and yet they run toward danger at a frequency that no survival model we have built can account for." Savin sat with that paragraph for a long time. Then she read the next one. "We have spent considerable effort attempting to classify them within existing frameworks, and we have concluded that this is a mistake. They are not a paradox. They are not a malfunction of the developmental model. They are something the model simply did not predict, because no other species has survived long enough in that particular combination of traits to reach the stage they have reached. If they survive long enough, they will be something the galaxy has not seen before. We do not know what that will look like. We find that we hope to see it." The last Kareth document relating to humans was written in the final years of the Kareth civilization, when the Vorath were already pressing in on their borders, and the outcome was beginning to look certain. It was short. The author was not named. We cannot help them. We cannot help anyone now, but we watched them for a long time, and we want it on record that they are worth watching. They are worth hoping for. Whatever comes next for us, we hope they make it through. We hope they find their way out to the stars. We hope when they do that they find someone out here worth finding. They deserve that much." Savin closed the archive. She sat in the quiet of the alcove for a long time, her hand still her crest. Very dim. The Kareth had hoped the humans would survive. They had written that hope into the record, and then they had been gone, and the hope had sat in the archive for 11,000 years, waiting. The humans had survived, and now they were building ships and pointing them at the dark between the stars and asking what was out there. Savin stood up, smoothed her robe, and walked to her desk. She opened a new document and began to write the formal proposal for the council. She wrote it carefully, and she did not leave anything out. When she was done, she read it back once and made 2 small corrections and filed it. The proposal requested that contact protocols for the humans be raised from Category 4, distant observation only. To Category 1, active preparation for first contact, the council approved it. The following morning, every single elder voted yes. Even Dorek. Captain Karen Ellis made it in the small galley off the bridge, added too much water the way she always did, and ate it, standing at the counter while looking at the navigation display on the wall screen. The Ardent Hope's upgraded successor, the exploration vessel Crossing Point, was 2 hours out from the coordinates that the decoded message on the old alien pod had pointed toward. 2 hours from the spot where, and if the translation was right and the math was right, and 11 years of careful preparation had not gone wrong somewhere along the way. Something was supposed to happen. Karen finished her oatmeal. She rinsed the bowl. She went to her bunk and wrote a short message to her daughter back on Earth, a 14-year-old named Lily, who had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, and who had made Karen promise the morning the Crossing Point launched to tell her everything. Something big might happen today. Karen wrote, I don't know exactly what, but whatever you hear about it, I want you to know that I was not afraid. She sent the message and did not add the second part, the part she kept to herself, which was, I was a little afraid, but not the kind that stops you. She went back to the bridge. The crew of the Crossing Point was small, 8 people selected over 4 years from a pool of several hundred candidates. They had been chosen not just for their technical skills, which were all exceptional, but for something harder to measure. The selection committee had looked for people who were calm under pressure, curious rather than aggressive when facing the unknown, and genuinely good at listening. Karen had been the unanimous first choice for captain. She had almost turned it down, and then her daughter had looked at her across the kitchen table and said, Mom, come on, and that had been the end of the debate. Communications Officer Colbarker was already at his station when Karen came onto the bridge, running through the signal protocols for the 100th time. He was 26, the youngest crew member, and he had the slightly dazed look of someone who had not slept well but was running on something stronger than sleep. He gave Karen a quick nod without looking away from his screens. Science Officer Dr. Leon Park was at his station reviewing the contact framework documents that the world's best xenolinguists and diplomatic theorists had spent a decade building. He looked up when Karen sat down. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, she agreed. They crossed the first hour without incident. The second hour passed more slowly. The bridge grew quiet in the way that bridges get quiet when everyone is thinking hard and nobody wants to be the person who says the obvious thing out loud. Then Cole said, contact, in a voice that was very steady and very quiet, and every head on the bridge turned toward him. On the long-range display, so something had appeared. It was large, roughly 3 times the size of the Crossing Point, shaped like an elongated crescent, its hull a deep blue-gray that caught the light of the distant sun in slow metallic ripples along its surface. It had dropped out of what the sensors were reading as some kind of space-folding transit, not the crude jump technology that human engineers were still working toward, but something smoother and more complete. One moment the space at those coordinates had been empty. The next moment it was not. Karen looked at it for several seconds. Open a channel, Cole. Working on it, he said, and she could hear in his voice that his hands were very steady, and she was glad of that. It took 11 minutes to lock a carrier wave. It took another 4 minutes before the translation buffer produced anything the human side could read. 11 years of preparation had gone into that translation buffer. Every scrap of the alien language, from the carved pod wall, every mathematical pattern, every repeated symbol cluster, fed into a system that had been refined and tested and refined again until the linguists were as confident as they could be without ever having spoken a real word with anyone on the other side. The first message came through as text. On Cole's screen, he read it once, then read it aloud to the bridge. We were not certain you would come out to meet us. Karen leaned forward slightly. Open my channel, Cole. Open, Captain, she said. We were not certain either, but we figured it was better than waiting. The reply took a little longer this time. When it came, Cole's voice was careful. And even as he read it, that is a very human thing to say. We have read about that. The bridge went completely still. Karen looked at Leon, who was staring at his console with the expression of a man who had spent his whole career preparing for a moment and was now discovering that nothing had actually prepared him for the moment. She looked at Cole, who had one hand pressed flat against the edge of his station and was not moving it. She looked back at the view screen where the crescent-shaped ship hung in the dark like a great slow question mark. She said, "You have read about us for some time." "Yes, the archive is large. We want to say something to you, and we debated how to say it correctly. Many species out here were afraid of what you might become. Oh, we have since changed our thinking." "What changed it?" The reply took longer this time. When it came, it was careful and deliberate, the way something is when the speaker has thought about the exact words for a long time. "A Drenai merchant, 40 years ago. Your people pulled his crew from a damaged ship and spent 3 days making repairs and sent them home without asking for anything in return." He told that story many times. It spread through several systems. Stories about your people travel further than warnings do, and they last longer. Cole Barker had both hands flat on his console now. He was looking at the screen, and his jaw was working like he was trying to decide whether to say something, and had decided against it. Leon Park had stopped looking at his data entirely. He was just sitting there. Karen Ellis looked at the view screen and thought about Gary Weston, a Coast Guard captain she had never met, who had pushed his engines too hard to get to a distress beacon and then refused payment for 3 days of repair work. She thought about how he had probably filed a routine report and gone back to his patrol route and never known that the small moment of ordinary decency he had chosen had traveled to the other side of the galaxy and was now, 40 years later, changing the shape of history. She said, "We would like to come aboard if that is acceptable." "We anticipated that you would ask," the Vilhari replied. "We have prepared a reception area. We studied your atmospheric and pressure requirements carefully. We want you to be comfortable." "That is very kind." "It is the least we could do," the voice said the man. Then there was a pause before the last part came through, and Karen would think about the timing of that pause many times in the years that followed. For the people the Karath hoped would survive, the bridge of the crossing point was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then Corinne Ellis stood up from her chair, straightened her uniform, and looked at her crew. At Cole with his hands still flat on the console, at Leon with his data forgotten, at the 6 other people who had crossed a very long distance to stand at this exact point in time. "All right," she said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried no trace of the thing she was keeping to herself. "Let's go meet our neighbors." And she walked toward the docking corridor, and her crew fell in behind her, and none of them looked back. Elder Savin had prepared for this for a long time. She had read every available account of human behavior, human customs, human ways of standing and speaking and showing respect. She had studied the way their faces moved when they felt things strongly, the particular shape of a human smile, the way the skin around their eyes changed when what they were feeling was real rather than performed. She had learned the gesture of an open hand, which meant in their culture something close to "I have no weapon and I mean no harm." She had practiced the pronunciation of several human greeting phrases until the translator at her collar no longer needed to do the heavy lifting. She had prepared for many possibilities. Standing in the blue-lit reception chamber of the Velhari vessel, with her council arranged in a formal greeting arc behind her, and the docking umbilical sealed and pressurized and ready, she ran through those possibilities one more time. She had prepared for humans who were cautious, humans who were aggressive, humans who were overwhelmed by the size of the moment and stumbled over their words, humans who tried to make everything into a negotiation immediately. She had not prepared for Corinne Ellis. The docking umbilical door opened, and the human captain walked through it and stopped just inside the chamber entrance. She was not tall by human standards. Savin had studied enough images to know that, but she stood as if she were taller than she was, the way people stand when they are used to rooms looking to them for direction. She had 4 crew members behind her: young man with careful eyes, an older man with a data tablet tucked under one arm, and 2 others who were looking around the chamber with the wide and alert attention of people who were trying to see everything at once. Corinne Ellis looked at the blue light on the curved walls. She looked at the organic architecture, the gentle angles that the Velhari preferred to sharp corners. She looked at the assembled council with their silver-tipped fingers and their luminescent crests and their 4-limbed bodies that were so completely different from her own. She took all of it in without flinching, without stepping back, without any of the frozen hesitation that Savin had half expected, even from a well-prepared human. And then she smiled. Savin had read about human smiles. She had seen them in footage. She had understood in an intellectual way that humans use the muscles of their face to signal emotional states to each other, and that the smile was among the most common of these signals, and understanding it and standing in front of it were 2 different things entirely. Because the smile reached the woman's eyes, it changed the whole shape of her face. It was not a performance. It was not a diplomatic tool. It was something that came from somewhere deep inside the human captain and arrived on her face before she had decided to put it there, and it was directed not at any single member of the Velhari Council, but at all of them, equally, the way a person smiles when they walk through a door and find exactly what they were hoping to find. Corinne Ellis walked forward and stopped. At a respectful distance from Savan, she pressed her right hand flat against her own chest, which the briefing materials had told Savan was a human gesture of personal introduction. "I am Corinne Ellis," she said, "the captain of the exploration vessel Crossing Point, representing the people of Earth. We are very glad to finally say hello." Savan pressed her 4 fingers together in the gesture of profound respect, the one the Velhari used only for the most significant occasions, the kind that happened perhaps twice in a generation. She had decided to use it before the humans arrived, and now she was glad she had. "I am Savan, elder of the Velhari Council," she replied through her translator, "and we are very glad to finally be found." They sat together for 3 hours that first day. The conversation was careful at first, the way conversations are when both sides have much to ask and are trying not to ask everything at once. There were questions about governance, about population, and about technology levels and territorial boundaries, and the long history of how the Velhari had come to be where they were. Corinne answered clearly and without evasion, and she asked her own questions in return with a directness that the council found refreshing. Most first contact scenarios in the archive involved a great deal of cautious circling before anyone said anything of substance. Corinne Ellis asked about the archive. Within the first 20 minutes, the message in the old pod mentioned a Drine merchant, she said. "You mentioned him when we were on the channel. How did his story reach you?" "The Drine trade network is large," Savan said. "Stories move through trade networks the way water moves through rock, slowly. But they get everywhere eventually." His story reached the Velhari Council through a secondary route, via a species called the Hirn, who trade along the boundary of your system. We began keeping a more careful record of your people after that." Corinne nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "He never knew, did he? Gary Weston. He never knew that story went anywhere." "Almost certainly not," Savan said. Corinne looked at the table surface. Something moved in her expression that Savan could not fully read. Then she looked up and said, "That seems about right, honestly. The people who do those things usually don't know." Food had been arranged on a long table. Along one side of the chamber, human provisions brought from the crossing point in sealed containers, and Velhari nutrient preparations arranged beside them. The formal session gave way to something less structured around the second hour. Human people began drifting toward the table in ones and twos. Dr. Leon Park, the science officer Savan, had learned tried a Velhari food crystal and stood motionless for a full minute while the cold mineral taste spread through his mouth. Then he turned to the young Velhari delegate standing nearest to him, junior navigator named Tev, and said, with complete sincerity, that it tasted like very cold grapefruit. Tev, who had no idea what grapefruit was, made a note to look it up. Tev, in return, tried a small piece of the flat baked food the humans called bread. He stood motionless for slightly longer than Leon had. Then he turned to his colleague and said in low Velhari that it was warm and soft, and it tasted like something he did not have a word for, which the colleague translated in his own mind as comfort. In the third hour, Savan found herself walking beside Corinne Ellis along the observation corridor. The long windows looked out at the Stars, the same stars from every side. The same lights in the same dark, but somehow different when you were standing beside someone who had crossed a very long way to reach them. I want to ask you something, Savan said. The council debated whether to raise it. Go ahead, Corinne said. She said it easily, the way she said most things. The old records describe your people in a particular way, Savan said. They describe you as something that cannot be stopped, something that, once it has decided to move toward a purpose, nothing in the galaxy has been able to turn aside. She paused. Is that true? Corinne was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the stars. It's true that we don't give up easily, she said at last. We lost a lot of people learning to reach space. We nearly broke our own planet before we made better choices. We are not gentle. Not by nature. She paused. But the thing that I think the old records might have missed, the thing that people who are afraid of us maybe don't account for, is that most of the time when a human refuses to stop, it is because they are trying to get somewhere worth going, to help someone worth helping, to build something that is worth the cost of building it. Savan considered this. Outside the window, the galaxy turned. The story, she said slowly, spoke of monsters. I have heard, Corinne said. And there was something in her voice that was almost a smile, though she was not smiling. The myths describe creatures that felt no fear, that accepted no defeat, and that could not be made to turn back by any force the universe had produced. Some of that is true, Corinne said. Some of it is exaggerated. We feel fear. We just try not to let it be the thing that makes the decision. The myth, Savan said, and she stopped walking and turned to look at the human captain directly. Never said this one thing. They described everything else. They described the stubbornness and the endurance and the refusal to accept an ending, but they never said that when a human refuses to stop, it is most often for someone else, a stranger on a damaged ship, a wounded soldier on the other side of a war, a child who will be born a generation after the person doing the building is already gone. She paused. The stories described a force. They did not say the force could also be kind. Corinne Ellis looked at the elder for a long moment. Then she said simply, we try. Behind them, in the reception chamber, Leon Park and the young Velhari, Navigator Tev, were bent over a shared data tablet, comparing star charts and arguing cheerfully about a mapping discrepancy and laughing. Neither of their languages had a word. Yet for what that sound was, two people from different stars finding the same thing funny at the same moment. But both of them recognized it immediately, without needing a word. The stars outside the window were the same stars they had always been, old and vast and indifferent, burning there, quiet millions of years without caring who looked up at them. But in this corridor and in the chamber behind it, something had changed that would not change back, and the myths had said they could not be stopped. The stories had called them monsters. Every word of it had been true in its own way, and yet, here at the edge of the dark, the monsters were sharing bread and laughing at star charts and asking each other in two languages that had never met before. Today, what comes next? The answer, it turned out, was everything. All of it was still ahead, every friendship that had not yet been made, every world that had not yet been seen, every story that had not yet been told, about the strange and stubborn and occasionally terrifying and surprisingly warm creatures from the third planet of the yellow star who had looked at the dark between the stars and decided, as they decided about most things, that the only reasonable response was to go toward it. The myths had been true, but they had only told half the story. The other half was just beginning.